All right, thank you all for being here. I think we are running a little late, but that's okay. It's good to see you all. I wanted to start this morning by doing a few clarifications because, people come in different forums and so forth. So I wanted to sum up the last two forums. The first one 2 weeks ago, I started us out with, and then last week, the Reverend Sarah Brokenborough was here, and she told us a lot about the discernment committee and the whole process of discernment. So a couple of things. One from 2 weeks ago, there were a couple of things that I wanted to just say about Gary's ministry among you. Gary was well loved by many people, and that's an important thing to realize, that coming to the end of Gary's time here, there were so many things to be thankful for. And I think the most important thing was not just the fact that he did had this wonderful vision and built up the church and so forth, but we have to remember that he was well loved by many people, and that is a testament to the work that he did here. So it's really important that you all know that. The other thing that is important, just to make sure that everybody understands that why Gary left, is that he retired. There was some discussion that maybe the bishop fired him, which could not be further from the truth that the bishop fired Gary, because the bishop does not have that power. Okay? Canonically, the bishop doesn't have the power to fire any priest. So Gary chose to retire, and that's that. So it was really important, I think, for me to say that, to clarify that from 2 weeks ago. The other thing that I want to do is talk about the discernment process, because that's what Sarah Brokenborough talked to us about last week. This discernment process is a process that's pretty standard around the church. And every diocese puts its own spin on it, and then every church puts its own spin on it as well. But this is something that's tried and true around the church. It probably will take a year. It may take a little longer. It could take a little shorter, but probably about a year. You should know, and if you get communications from us, that there is a form to fill out if you would like to be considered to be on the discernment committee. That is on the website. It also came in an email. I think there's some links. Sarah, there are links in the Spirit as well, where you can go. So there's just all kinds of ways you can get to that form. If you want to be considered to be on the committee and you can't find all that, just see one of us and we'll help you find it. The two chairs, the co-chairs of that committee, have been named. They are Shelley Spalding and Jay Moore, both of whom are longtime parishioners here, both of whom very active. And I think there's a lot of enthusiasm around Jay and Shelley. So that's part of that committee, or part of that process that Sarah talked about. The other thing that I think is important to know is the type of person we're looking for to be on that committee. In the old way of thinking about discernment committees, you'd have a representative from the choir, and a representative from the youth, and a representative from the altar guild, and a representative from the men's group, and so forth. What we've learned over the years is that doesn't necessarily make for the best committee. The best committee is made up of people who have the gift of discernment, the gift of thoughtfulness, They are people of prayer, people who consider the whole picture, and people who want the best for the whole church. So when you find people like that who make up a committee, what you find is that everybody's represented. Everybody's represented, and that because the people are concerned about the whole picture in the whole church. And everyone is represented well with folks like that. So we're looking for people who are thoughtful about the future of the church, thoughtful about how the church is made up, people who have the gift of discernment. Okay? So that's the last 2 weeks. I thought I would get into something a little bit different to talk to you about the particularities of St. Stephen's, but I wanted to see before that if anyone had any questions from the last 2 weeks, since you've had a couple of weeks to think about things, and then we'll move on. Anybody have anything? If you'll say your question, then I can repeat it, if you have anything. No? Oh, here we go. So the question is, can I give information about the preschool? Because that's an important topic. Let's see, what can I give information-wise about the preschool? Yeah, thanks for... first of all, let me say that I've heard so many good things about the preschool since I first came here. And I don't know that it would be edifying for any of us to go through why it was closed and stuff. I think there are a lot of opinions about that, and people have come to see me to talk to me about that. What's going to happen, nothing can happen with the preschool, as I understand it, for another year and a half, right? But there will be a small group put together to sort of see what's feasible going forward, to see what kinds of things might be done to either restart the preschool, just to figure it out. I don't think anybody has any preconceived notions about what actually has to happen, but it's going to be studied. Honestly, it's going to be something that, because of the contract with that place over there, thank you, gosh, my mind is just blank today. Because of the contract with St. Catherine's, nothing can be done until the 2023 school year, right? Yeah. And so that's going to be an issue that the next rector is going to have to tackle. But like everything we're doing this year, we want to give the next rector the opportunity to be successful in that. So there will be a group of people, a committee, to study what's been done with the preschool and what can be done with the preschool. Unfortunately, that's about all I can tell you right now. That space is being temporarily rented to St. Catherine's because they're construction, and they have some construction going on, and so you do see kids going in and out of there. That is a temporary, little kids, I mean. And then there's the other older kids that go in and out of there as well. It's a small group of kids. Okay, that may not be all that you want, but that's more than you had. Okay, thanks. Will, were you trying to get my attention? Okay. Yes.
What do you do to keep the powerful or the rich uninvolved in the discernment process? Because when they start giving away club memberships and things like that, it distorts it.
So the question is, what do you do to keep the powerful and rich away from the discernment process? Because you give people things like club memberships, it distorts the process. So I'm not sure that's... when the discernment committee, as I said a minute ago, when the discernment committee is chosen, the qualities that that person has for spiritual discernment, are they a people of prayer? Are they people who understand and care for the whole of St. Stephen's? That's what we consider to be on the committee. And again, it's not a person's status, it's not a person's particular membership in groups, it's not a person's giving to the church. The only thing that has to be true is that they are, quote, here's the old church phrase, known to the treasurer. Not how much they are known to the treasurer, just that they are known to the treasurer. There's an old story about actually, supposedly this is a true story about a church in Northwest Texas where there was a rich and powerful person who wanted something to happen in the church. He went to see the rector, and the rector said, well, we have to, consider everything about this. And this guy said, son, sometimes church life is like pig farming. Sometimes you weigh them, sometimes you count them. So we want to avoid that. We don't want to weigh the votes or count the votes. We just want a person who has the gift of discernment. So I hope that answers your question, Lee.
Yeah, except if I go a little farther, we were guilty of that with Karen, in my opinion. Okay. And that hurt us.
Well, I think that the future will depend on a group of people who thoughtfully consider what the next season of St. Stephen's life is like. So, yeah. Okay, so the question is, what is spiritual discernment? It's a good question, but it's not like you can just have a set definition. I think that people who have the gift of discernment are people who have a lively spiritual life. In other words, that they're not people who just come to church and sit in the pew, but they have some sense of what prayer is. They have some sense of the gathered understanding that the gathered community is the body of Christ, and to use some of Paul's terms or phrases, that the hand cannot say to the foot, I have no need of you. I think a person with the gift of discernment are people who have some demonstrated it's not ability. Ability is not the word I'm looking for. Yeah, thank you. Some demonstrated witness or activity of doing a variety of things in the church that might be service-oriented. It's really hard to say exactly what it is, but it's almost like you kind of know a person has those gifts when you talk to them and see what they're about. It doesn't have anything to do, as I go back to this question from Lee, about a person's, membership or status or how much they give. Other questions before I kind of move into a different topic? Yeah, Martha?
I just listened to that. I just wonder if the word intuitive can be part of that. That some people have a more intuitive sense of their surroundings and the strengths and weaknesses around them.
I think it's a great phrase. Martha pointed out that the word intuitive would be a good word. I think that's right. Thank you. That's some people have an intuition about things. Yeah. Thanks. That's a helpful word. Okay. Okay. One of the things I wanted to do this morning was also tell you about why St. Stephen's is different. You all know St. Stephen's to be different because of a variety of things, because of your experience here maybe, because of the Celtic service, because of a particular way that things are done here. One of the other things that makes St. Stephen's different is its size. It's in the top, probably 7 of the largest Episcopal churches in the United States. I mean, did most everybody know that? I don't know if everybody knew that. Yes? No, you didn't know that. Some people didn't know that. You didn't? Top 7 in the United States. So in the top 1%, say, or 0.5% of the size of Episcopal churches in the United States. With that comes some characteristics that set large churches apart. It's not just lots of people. It's not just lots of activities, but churches of a particular size have a particular way of doing things. Back in the 70s, smart people began to study how the details about churches from an organizational development point of view. So a group called the Alban Institute was sort of on the forefront of this, and out of that came some other research and other types of understandings about how churches work. Some of that research came out of seminaries and divinity schools. Some of it came out of separate organizations like Alban. But there became these ways of looking at churches that were very helpful in understanding how churches work. One of those people was a guy named Arlen Rothage. Rothage, I think, for a time was at the seminary that was in Evanston, Illinois, Seabury Western, which is not in its former state anymore. It's connected to a consortium. But he characterized churches in a little book called Sizing Up a Congregation. So he characterized churches as family-sized churches, pastoral-sized churches, program-sized churches, and corporate-sized churches. We've since changed that corporate name to Resource. Someone did that a couple of decades ago. A woman named Alice Mann, who was with Alban Institute, added a 5th characteristic called transitional. That would be between pastoral and program. But the largest church or the largest size in that model is resource size. St. Stephen's is a resource size congregation. And every one of these sizes has a particular way of doing things. So the more and more that churches were studied in this way, the more and more that some good understandings came out of that. A guy named Rory Oswald, who was a Lutheran pastor with Alban Institute, did some very interesting work in that regard. And then there's a guy who just retired a few years ago from Church of the Redeemer in Manhattan named Timothy Keller. Keller's theology would not really be something that most Episcopalians might click with, but he understood a lot about church sizes and what made churches work in a particular way. So make sure we have plenty of time here. So I wanted to share some of these characteristics with you because I think they're important to understand about the future of St. Stephen's. Now, one of the things that we know is that church is changing all over our country, right? We know that the rise of the nuns, everybody know what the nuns are? Not N-U-N, but N-O-N-E-S, the nuns. We're not being attacked by, Sally Field flying in. The rise of the nuns, which means that more and more and more people are not identifying as Christians, not identifying as religious, certainly not identifying as part of a particular denomination or particular church. So we know that that is becoming more prevalent in the culture, and that is causing some challenges for churches, right? The other thing is that the demographics are changing, and so churches are getting grayer and balder, and young people are not as apt to come to church as might have been true when I was a kid and when many of you were children, right? So that means the smaller churches are struggling. And you're seeing more and more and more smaller churches having to do creative or sometimes desperate things to keep their doors open. Many smaller churches are now using part-time clergy, either clergy who are bivocational or clergy who are sharing different churches, doing the ministry in 2 or 3 different churches. Going back to that old circuit rider ministry method that the Methodists had hundreds of years ago. It's not a bad model, but the question is it sustainable? And the bigger question is, what is the purpose of the church? What is the purpose of the church in the community? Is it to have services? Is it to have communion? Is it to be a place where people can come and have their spiritual needs met? Is it to take care of people in their hard times of life, in the difficult times of life? What's the purpose of the church? And I think that is a question that the churches are wrestling with more and more and more. The other issue is, there are lots of other issues, aging buildings, the decline in giving, all those kinds of things. So what that means is a church like St. Stephen's, which is the appropriate name of a resource church, is really important for the future of the big church, the wider church. And the reason for that is not only do you have resources, that's what that term means, you have resources in order to do the ministry that you want to do, but you are a resource. You can be a resource to the community, to other churches, to the bishop's office, to a variety of different ways that you are needed. So you can have all the programs that you want to have. You can be an important piece of the community, and that frankly, that's why the vision that you all have been talking about, that Gary brought to you, this idea of a village green and a new abbey. Those are futuristic visions. Those are good for what we are facing in Christendom in the United States, right? So, the question then becomes who has the ability to be the next leader to maximize the resources you have, both for you and for the community and the wider church. So that is an important piece of the discernment that has to happen for the next rector. Is everybody with me? Any questions about any of that? Yes, sir. So that's a really good question and good point. So the I guess question or statement is that you're concerned that we have not been as attentive as we could be to the relationship with the diocese as in past years. Would that be an accurate way of summing that up? And right, so the focus has been on did you say other large churches? Yeah, being part of the consortium of. Yeah. Mhm. Okay, so the more concerned with the national stature than Virginia. I think that's a complicated question, but it's a good point. I will say that in my experience of being part of sort of the wider Episcopal work, is that well, first of all, I was a canon of the ordinary here, as you probably know, for 6 years. So I really believe in the connection between the local parish and the bishop's office, partly because we had so many resources when I was on the bishop's staff that people just didn't call on, that we could really help with. And so I think that is a piece of it. I also think that churches like St. Stephen's have the ability to host big events for the diocese and do other things. I think the diocese is also in discernment. You all know that. The diocese, you're going to elect a new bishop next summer. The next bishop would be smart to cultivate good relationships with the larger churches, because that's the future of the church. The other side of it is that that you can learn a lot from people who are like you. I did some research before today just to kind of get a sense of what other large churches, that top 7, that top 10 were like, and it was fascinating. And this is an important point because we learn stuff from other big churches. So that's something to know. For example, there are a couple of churches in Dallas, and I know everybody says the old joke, everything's big in Texas, right? Right, but there are a couple of churches that are just slightly bigger than St. Stephen's, but have considerably more staff. Why is that important? The more staff, the more programs, the more things you can do, the more you can serve both your people and the community. Why do they have more staff? Because they raise more money. Right. Right. So Church of the Incarnation in Dallas has, how many? Like 9, I got a note here somewhere, like 9 full-time clergy and 4 part-time clergy. St. Michael and All Angels has 7, not to mention a lay staff that's much larger. The cathedral in Atlanta has a similar number of clergy, but much larger lay staff, and so forth. But it's not just that kind of thing. You really can learn stuff from the way other churches do things, and I think that is shown out in the pandemic. How churches have, please choose another pew, what churches have done in that regard, how churches have done outdoor worship, how churches have, thought about mask and numbers and all that kind of thing. When I was doing the long-term interim in Knoxville, I talked to my friends all over the country in bigger churches about how they were registering people, what their policy on mask was, what were you doing about weddings, blah, 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 blah. So being connected with large churches is not a bad thing, but I'm not disagreeing with you that being connected to the diocese is an important thing too. And, I would hope that because you have a new rector coming in and a new bishop coming in, that connection could sort of start afresh for St. Stephen's. I do. Other questions about any of this? Okay, so here's some things that I think might be interesting to you about large churches. Roy Oswald says that, let me just put it to you. What do you think if a new person came to St. Stephen's would be the most striking thing they would notice their first experience at St. Stephen's? The building, the ritual, the music, the people. Okay, yeah, you would hope. The activity every day of the week, right? Yeah, yeah. So I think all of those are true about St. Stephen's. What Oswald says is that the quality of Sunday morning worship is the first thing you usually notice in a church this size, right? The quality. And he makes one of the examples. Somebody mentioned the music. One of the examples that he uses, or maybe Keller uses, is that in a pastoral-sized church, for example, you have people who are probably untrained in the choir and sometimes do solos, and everybody loves them because they know them. And everybody says, oh, wasn't that good? But the 97-year-old lady singing Were You There When They Crucified My Lord, because she had done it for 60 years, is probably not going to happen at St. Stephen's, right? It happened in a church that I was associated with many years ago, and nobody would tell her that she couldn't sing anymore because she was 97 years old. And she did it probably sang at the Good Friday service just a few months before she died, right? So you wouldn't see that at St. Stephen's because the bigger the church, the more important the quality of the ritual, of the liturgy, right? And so what what your rector typically in a large church is going to do is make sure that the liturgy is done well. Now, I think that was really important to Gary. I think it should be important to the next rector. And I think what you've got now here is a staff that really takes that seriously. Will and Claudia and John and Kate all take that very seriously. The vergers, the acolytes, the altar guild, everybody takes that seriously, and that's important for this church. So I think y'all are in good shape there. Let's see. So Tim Keller says, and this is important in thinking about the next person, the staff person who goes from a church of 400 to a church of 2,000 is in many ways making a far greater change than if he or she moved from one denomination to another. How about that? That's a pretty interesting statement, isn't it? Let me say it again. So his point is if somebody goes from, as a staff member, like a clergy staff, from a church of 400 to a church of 2,000, or in this case, a church of almost 5,000, it's a bigger change than moving from one denomination to another, because the systems are so incredibly different and complex. A large church is not simply a bigger version of a small church. The difference in communication, community formation, and decision-making processes are so great that the leadership skills required in each are of almost completely different orders. Right? So that's an important thing, I think, for the discernment committee to understand. That you're not just looking for somebody who's done well in a pastoral-sized church, which is a church that has about 150 on Sunday morning. Because before COVID, you all had between 11 and 1,200 total, including the Celtic service. The complexity of that is very, very, very different. The communication needs are very, very, very different. And again, you all have some talented people already on staff that do that so well. Sarah's sitting back there. I'm going to just say how good she is. Award-winning Sarah Bartenstein, right? She's good. She's great. And y'all are lucky there. But your next rector has to manage all this, has to be able to manage all this. And those are particular skills that are not always easy to find. I'm not sure I have those skills completely. I'm lucky to have done a lot of, diocesan stuff and know about church systems and all that stuff. But if I had to manage this place ongoing for a long time, I'd pull my hair out. Okay. Let's see. Yeah, sure. You got one? Yes. Yes, so that's a great question. So the question is, I've been talking a lot about management skills and so forth. How much are we taught as clergy? The answer is in almost universally, we're not, right? So then you have to look for people who do have those skills to be on your staff. And it's very interesting you brought this up, because Tim Keller talks about how hard it is for clergy on large staffs to be collegial, which is a fascinating thing, that it's very difficult for clergy on large staffs to have collegial relationships because we're not trained that way. The vast majority of Episcopal churches, the average Sunday attendance of Episcopal churches across the United States is under 70, right? Before COVID. So that's the type of church we are typically trained to serve. So in a place like St. Stephen's, and by the way, we're working on this with the personnel committee and the vestry, the finance committee, working on an organizational chart, working on how people report to one another, just to be clear about it. The good news is that the model of having a vicar, which we have here, the vicar is standing back there by the door, is an excellent one for this type church. And so having a person, so if you think about an organizational chart where you've got a CEO who's going to be your new rector, and then you've got, let's just say, a chief program officer, which is the vicar, and then what you need and what we're working on, we hope, is a chief operating officer, which is an administrator. We really don't have that right now. You've had it in forms before and kind of piecemeal, but what we hope will happen in the next year is to develop an administrative side of the organizational chart with a COO. So you would have a CEO of your rector when he or she comes. You'd have the vicar who works out all the programmatic stuff. Then you'd have a chief operating officer who would work out all the administrative stuff. That would be the ideal. And then the key for the rector is managing the relationships between all those people. And that is a hard job. And so a rector has to be collaborative. A rector has to be clear, has to be visionary, and has to be, some of you in business may know about the principle of subsidiarity. Does anybody know that term, the principle of subsidiarity? Yeah, some people do. The idea behind the principle of subsidiarity is that you are always, if you are in charge of something, you are always trying to push details down so that you can clearly think about the direction